I'm Charles Overby, the chairman of the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics, and I want to welcome all of you here today. This is going to be an informative, insightful, and interesting program. I want to especially welcome the members of the SPJ who are here from Mississippi, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Louisiana. They're here for 2 days, and this is part of their program. And we're just so glad that we could combine this program with the SPJ conference. We have distinguished people here, as we always do here at the Overby Center, but today in particular. And I'm going to let the impresario, Curtis Wilkie, carry on the program and introduce our distinguished panelists. All of you know Curtis is the inaugural senior fellow at the Overby Center and is a true national treasure here at Ole Miss. So I'm going to turn it over to our treasurer, not our treasurer. We're smarter than that to not let him be the treasurer, but our treasurer, Curtis Wilkie. Curtis, take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, and we're glad to have you all with us. I wanted to add that there will be a reception following our program out in the lobby. I hope you'll stick around for that. You can mingle with our guests today. We've got a wonderful panel. Just before I introduce them, I should say for some of your visitors who may not know Mississippi history or may not be old enough to remember, simply put, the man that we're remembering this evening, Medgar Evers, was the most prominent civil rights figure in Mississippi and was achieving national renown in the early 1960s at a time when the movement was just gaining momentum. He was shot to death in the driveway of his home in Jackson by a sniper in June 1963. So he was an early martyr. Others would follow in that decade, but he was then and he still is a hero 50 years later. I was just thinking we could spend the rest of the program for me introducing this panel of people because each of them have such impressive backgrounds, but I'm going to just hit a few highlights. We're especially honored to have Medgar Evers' widow, Mrs. Myrlie Evers-Williams, here with us today. She continued to champion her husband's causes for the 50 years since his death. She's been a community leader in both Mississippi and California, where she lived for many years. She's been active in the Democratic Party and a leader with the National Women's Political Caucus. In 1995, she became chairman of the NAACP at a time that this organization was very troubled, and she brought it around. She restored stability and the reputation of this group as the premier civil rights organization in America. In recognition of her long labors on behalf of the Medgar Evers Institute, just recently the board of directors have renamed it the Medgar and Myrlie Evers Institute. She holds 16 honorary degrees from various colleges and universities, and a year ago she assumed the position of Distinguished Scholar in Residence at Alcorn State University, where she and Medgar met. Most recently, you may have seen her delivering the invocation at President Obama's inauguration. So we're so glad to have you here with us. Leslie McLemore to her left, thank you for being with us again here at the Overby Center. Dr. McLemore is a native of Walls, Mississippi. He earned a BA from Russ College, a master's from Atlanta University, and his PhD in government from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. And more importantly for our purposes, he was one of the many young African-American students who provided much of the manpower and woman power for the civil rights movement. Leslie was a campus leader for the NAACP. He worked with the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and was involved with the Mississippi Freedom Democrats. He is in many ways kind of the embodiment of the accomplishments of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, because he was elected to the Jackson City Council in 1999, served for 10 years, including, he probably doesn't want to remember this, but 4 months as acting mayor of Jackson. Today, he is the director of the Fannie Lou Hamer National Institute on Citizenship and Democracy at Jackson State University. And on my far left, our friend Jerry Mitchell, who has all the characteristics of a great journalist. Jerry's got talent, he's got perseverance, commitment, and he's very resourceful. His byline has graced the Clarion-Ledger in Jackson for nearly a quarter of a century. I think I may have met Jerry earlier, but I got to know him in 1994 at the trial of De La Beckwith in Jackson, which finally resulted in the conviction of Medgar Evers' assassin. That trial would never have taken place had it not been for Jerry's work, and we'll be talking about that. In the years since, he's built a national reputation for investigative reporting, and especially for his digging into cold cases in the civil rights era. Jerry, we're just delighted that you're back with us at the Overby Center also. Ms. Evers, let me start off with you. You're going to be our commencement speaker here in about a month, and we're delighted about that. When we had the Oxford Conference for the book here a couple of weeks ago, Michael Williams was here, who's written a biography of Medgar Evers, and I asked him about one of the things pertinent to Ole Miss. In 1953, your husband applied for admission to the Ole Miss Law School and was denied. And I think it's great irony that here, you're all these years later, you're going to be our commencement speaker. Let me start by asking, what were his dreams? How much was accomplished? And what would he think of this institution and Mississippi in general today?
I believe that Medgar would be pleased and perhaps proud of the accomplishments that have been made in the state of Mississippi, and particularly at Ole Miss. He wanted very badly to attend this institution of higher learning and be able to take those skills acquired here to be, should I say, a politician in the best sense of the word. Of all of his work, he never asked for anything. He never expected anything in return. I would often say to him, there are other people who have come into the state of Mississippi and who are getting recognition for their work. You have been here from the very beginning. You have helped to pave the way for these other people to come in and work. Why don't you seek recognition for that? And I have to tell this audience that he had a damaging look whenever he wanted to put that on his face. And he was all but insulted that I would ask him or even indicate that he would gain publicity from his work. And he said, that is not what I am about, Myrlie. I'm about doing the job. So it makes no difference who gets the recognition from it as long as the job gets done. I disagreed with him, and I think I perhaps still do. But I understand why he felt the way that he did. Medgar, a native Mississippian who had seen a dear friend of his father's hanged. He didn't actually see the hanging, but he saw the remains of clothes, of blood, all of it. And I think, if anything, that one incident made him aware of the fact that there was so much to be done in his native state. And for whatever reason or reasons, he loved Mississippi. He came from a background of where his father was very, very strong, who told his family, you can walk on the sidewalks in this town where we live. For some of you, you might not know that there was a time when African Americans could not walk on the sidewalks. His father also had to go under the laws of a sharecropper, even though he wasn't a sharecropper, but you purchased your groceries at a store and a record was kept, and you were told how much you owed and were expected to pay that. Daddy Jim, as Medgar's father was known, was a very good accountant, and he would dispute the bill at times. Once he did so, and 3 men attempted to jump on him. As the story goes, there was a bottle on the counter. He took that bottle and cracked it and told the boys, "Get out now, I'm coming." And he backed out of that room with that broken bottle in his hand. Those were things that helped to shape Medgar, not only in knowing some of the terrible things that happen in the state of Mississippi to people of his race, but also the need to be brave, to be strong, to challenge. And that was a part of what helped him to become the man he was and to move forward. He also loved the state of Mississippi, and I do mean genuinely loved the state, and believed that it could be a much better place for all people.
During that time, it was obviously a different state than it is today. How much anxiety hung over you all? I mean, you knew it was dangerous, his work, and finally realized on that terrible night in Jackson.
Of course we knew all of that. Both of us were native Mississippians. Our backgrounds were a little different. My parents were school teachers. They did not believe in rocking the boat. You excelled as far as you could in the sense that the state would allow you to. Medgar's background was different, and he believed that being a citizen of this country should have allowed him to do and pursue whatever it was that he wanted to do and to pursue. So that took him forward, whereas I was somewhat reluctant at first and perhaps did not give him the support I wished I had in the beginning. But we learn and we live, and he brought me along with him step by step. And I too came to believe that it would take activism, it would take a risk of life to help change things around. And I'd like to think that I was a pretty good support system for him in all of that. Of course, after his assassination, I took up the cause. And we can talk about that later. But it's been a long journey, and it's been frustrating, but it's also been good. And one of the best things that came from all of this is that I learned to live without fear. Realism, of course, you know what can happen. Even today, as we sit here, I think we all are aware that there could be some event that would cause distress on racial lines. But you gain strength, you gain determination, and you pick up where your fallen comrade has fallen, and you move ahead. That's it.
Leslie, describe for us a little bit, if you will, the climate, the environment of violence that existed in the early 60s when you were a young man and getting involved in the movement, and the danger that was involved in, and also you know, how much of an inspirational figure was Medgar Evers, both before his death and then after his death, whether that intimidated you all in any way?
Okay. First of all, let me say how delighted I am to be on this panel with Mrs. Evers-Williams and Jerry Mitchell. I'm not sure how I got here, except I've known Curtis for a very long time, and when he was working for the Clarksdale newspaper and writing those bad stories about the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. So I guess that's why I'm here. And then I'm also delighted to be here because Michael Vincent Williams has written a marvelous book on Medgar. And then I discovered that the young lady next to him was his mother. I thought it was his wife, you know, so that's the author's wife. So welcome, sister. You know, this is great.
This guy's still a politician, isn't he?
Well, it's the truth, though. You know, I'm just absolutely honored to be here. So thank you for inviting me and just to be in this audience. In 1960, I was a student up the road at Rush College in Holly Springs and got involved in the movement actually before I graduated from high school in Walls, Mississippi. And my mother and father and my grandfather, my father was actually a sharecropper, my grandfather was a landowner, and my mother lived in Walls and my father lived in Walls, and I got involved in the movement in high school. And my grandfather was a very strong figure in my life, and my mother was very strong, and they were concerned about my high school activities, but when I went to Rust in Holly Springs, they were always fearful of what could happen, but violence was ever present, and just doing what we were doing in Holly Springs. Holly Springs is a very small town. It was small town then, small town now. So we tried to integrate whatever we could integrate as students in Holly Springs. They had a drugstore there with 4 chairs at the counter. They took the chairs out, so we couldn't integrate the drugstore. They took the chairs out, then we closed down the movie theater in Holly Springs. So after that, we did voter registration. But voter registration was also risky. It was risky business. And I helped to register people in Holly Springs and Marshall County and Benton County, and some in Tate County and some in my home county, DeSoto County. But the real value of my participation is that when I got to college and got involved in the movement, the civil rights movement sort of changed my direction in life. I went to college with the idea of becoming a doctor, a medical doctor, and got involved in the movement. And within the span of 2 years, I met Aaron Henry, I met Medgar Evers, I met Bob Moses, I met a man named S.T. Nero, who was head of the NAACP in Marshall County and Holly Springs. And I was inspired by Medgar Evers and Aaron Henry and others even before I met Medgar Evers. And it turns out that Aaron Henry's brother-in-law, Reverend Merrill Winston Lindsay, was the chaplain at Rust and the pastor of Asbury United Methodist Church in Holly Springs. They were married to 2 sisters. And so Aaron Henry would often come to the campus as we were forming the NAACP chapter. And in 1962, we formed a chapter, end of 61. In 62, Medgar came to the campus to install us, all of the officers. And one of the things that I remember, because we talked about this so often, is that Medgar Evers had the firmest handshake of anybody I had met in my life. I think I had a sore hand for a week, you know, because he had that firm grip. But I was inspired by the activity. So being in the NAACP gave me the opportunity to meet a variety of people. C.C. Bryant, Amzie Moore, all of these people who were very supportive of Medgar in the NAACP. And one of the things I was most impressed with, and this is on reflection, after being this young person and now being an older person, is the centrality of Medgar Evers as the first full-time field secretary of the NAACP in Mississippi. And in the mind of Medgar Evers, what has really impressed me as I reflect on meeting all these people was really the mind and the courage of Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers, and I'm saying this before Mrs. Evers, she knows much better than I do, but he was absolutely a brilliant man. I mean, he was a strategist, but he was courageous. And clearly when she met him at Alcorn, and she was reluctant to come along, she said, but, you know, obviously that was one of the best decisions he ever made, you know, when he met this freshman at Alcorn and brought her along, you know. But, you know, he was an athlete, and he was brilliant. And the thing that I think is so important that most of us have omitted when we've written the books and we talk about Medgar Evers is that in leading up to 1954, his role in the Regional Council on Negro Leadership with Dr. Howard and those other people in Mount Bayou and his experience in the Delta. But what he did, Curtis, that is so important, is that he took those few chapters of the NAACP, organized additional chapters across the state of Mississippi in so many places where the NAACP had not been, but also in occasions where they had come and gone, actually. Okay, so he established this network that I think that we don't appreciate even today, the network and the wealth of leadership that he helped develop. So when SNCC came to town, when COFO was formed, when CORE came to town, when SCLC came to town, Medgar Evers had been working with Aaron Henry and C.C. Bryant and E.W. Steptoe and Dovey and Winston Hudson, all those people, Sam Bailey. So he laid the foundation. So it seems to me that as we reflect on his life and his memory, is that we cannot forget that when SNCC and all the other activists came to Mississippi, that they dealt with the leadership that had been identified in these counties and towns across the state. And 99.9% of these people were members of the NAACP. And that's important in terms of the centrality of the leadership. I'll get into other stuff later on, but you know, I'm always struck when I think about Medgar is what if? What if? What if Medgar Evers had lived? What if he had gone to law school here? What if? You know, we have an African-American president now, but Medgar Evers was that caliber of person. I mean, I was just absolutely impressed with his brilliance and his courage. And he obviously has made a difference, not only in this state, but in this country.
Yeah. Thank you. On a personal note, I remember as a young reporter covering a civil rights rally in Clarksdale, and Aaron Henry was the state president of NAA, but there were a number of dignitaries there. If I recall, Roy Wilkins was there, the national secretary of the NAA. James Meredith was there that night, but the most charismatic figure of all was Medgar Evers. He was very charismatic. Jerry, 1963, Medgar Evers is murdered. Shortly afterwards, within a few days, no more than a couple of weeks, an arrest is made. People generally know who's responsible. You know, the murdered weapon is found.
Right.
It's De La Beckwith, a guy from Greenwood.
Right.
He is tried twice in Jackson the next year, I believe in '64. 2 trials, they both wind up as mistrials. One footnote, the prosecutor was a young district attorney named Bill Waller.
Right.
And my sense is that there was appreciation for the effort that Waller made to prosecute and convict Beckwith. And 1971, Bill Waller was elected governor of Mississippi, in part, I think, with the vote of African Americans who had appreciated the effort that he made, and indeed he was a transitional political figure. But in the meantime, the villain has escaped any further prosecution. He's living in triumph up at Signal Mountain, Tennessee. And then a young reporter comes to work for the Clarion-Ledger in 1989, I believe.
I came to work on 86, but I began working on that story now. You know.
And turns out our whole history here has changed. And you and Mrs. Evers both kind of worked together on this, but eventually brought the old buzzard to justice. Tell us a little bit about how that came about.
Well, I don't know if you're like me, but if someone tells me I can't have something, I want it like a million times worse, so y'all that way. And so the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission, you know, the Mississippi legislature in its infinite wisdom has sealed all those records for 50 years. So nobody can see them. And me being a cynical reporter, my first thought was, well, there's obviously something in there. And so I developed sources who began to leak me those files. And that was in '89. And what they showed was at the same time the state of Mississippi was prosecuting Byron De La Beckwith for the killing of Medgar Evers, this other arm of the state, the Sovereignty Commission, segregation spy agency, was secretly assisting the defense, trying to get Beckwith acquitted. And so when I had that information, I called Myrlie Evers. I did a story, and I also called Myrlie Evers. So it ran October 1st, '89. I asked her opinion about it, and she came back and said she felt the case should be reopened. And then one thing kind of led to another after that. You know, we editorialized about it. I think the Jackson City Council said they should do it, and eventually the district attorney, Ed Peters, said, okay, we'll reopen the case. And that's a real short version of that, but that's kind of what, it was much more, there were many more machinations than that, but that's kind of the short version of how that case got reopened.
Among the things you were looking for was a transcript, was it not? And
she had it.
Ms. Evers, you just happened to have it when it had been lost in Jackson.
Yeah, everything was missing. I mean, you didn't have any, there was no murder weapon, no evidence, no transcript. About a couple months later, Jackson police were cleaning out a closet and happened to find a box that contained the crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron De La Beckwith lifted from the murder weapon. And she had the transcript and safety deposit box. And then the prosecutor in the case found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet. So, you know, it's like all these things that had to happen, you know, did happen. And I always tell people, you young journalists, I know we got some people interested in journalism and young journalists, I mean, why ever write a novel? I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's just amazing. Yeah.
Even made a movie of it, but you were there for that trial in Jackson. Tell us a bit about it. It was high drama there in that courtroom in Jackson.
It was, but I'd like to go back.
Go ahead.
I'd like to go back just a little. For this audience, Jerry Mitchell and I worked together for a very long time to see that Beckwith was convicted, because we were positive that he was the person who pulled the trigger on that gun. I was told by so many people not to pursue opening the case. I had talked about it, and people of all ages, including very young people, had said to me, it'll never happen, nothing will ever come of it. I had made a promise to Medgar the night before he was killed that if anything happened to him and I was still alive, I would do everything I could to see that justice prevailed in that case. I don't make promises lightly. If I make a promise, I try to keep it. Time went by, and I recall receiving a call from Jerry Mitchell, and he said, I understand you're still interested in opening reopening this case? And my answer was a definite yes, because I could not forget the first trial where Governor Ross Barnett walked into the courtroom while I was testifying, paused at the gate, looked at me, walked over to Beckwith, slapped him on his back, good old boy kind of thing, shook his hand while I was testifying. And I had just come out of a session with the prosecutor, and I asked him, how will you address me in court? Make note now, at that time, it was very important for us to be addressed as Mr. and Mrs. and by our name and not by boy and girl. And I had no idea what he was going to do. I remember this man sitting in his chair and is swirled around with his back to me. And in time, he turned around and he said, you were born in Mississippi. You know that when you in Rome, you do as the Romans do. And I said to him, if you call me anything else other than Mrs. Evers in court, I will correct you right there on the spot. There was a deadly silence there. So both of us knew what we were dealing with in that courtroom. And when the governor walked in, paused and looked at me, walked over to Beckwith and slapped him on his back, the good old buddy system, that was a clear message to the jury. Don't bother this man. And I became even more determined to do whatever I could to see that justice prevailed at that point. I was so fortunate to meet and know Jerry Mitchell, because Jerry, if I may, I think I can say, without thought, it became a passion of the two of us. And he's, please allow me the time to say this, he is modest about what he does, and he is a brilliant man who has bulldog tenacity. I don't think I've ever said that to you about yourself. But when I don't know whether it was the first or second trial where the transcript was missing, and the district attorney called and he said, we can't go any further in this case because we don't have the transcript. I replied to him, don't worry, I have a copy of it. And there was silence, and he said, but we don't know whether it's real or not. I said, well, it has a seal of Mississippi on it. I think that should make it real. Well, mail it to us. Mail it. I say, I'll be sure that you got it. I called Jerry, and I told him what was up, and I said, Jerry, what are we going to do? And it became a we kind of thing. The decision was made that I would fly to Jackson with the 3-volume manuscript in my arm, without cover, and he would be there to meet me at the airport with a photographer. So it was documented. No one could question whether these documents didn't get there, they were lost some way or the other. And truly, they were the official documents of the state and of that trial. That's just one of the things, and I'm going to skip here just a little bit to say, we became partners in all of this, talked almost every day, plotted, planned, scheme. I have never seen anyone go after a story and the deep details and nuances of it all than Jerry Mitchell. Between Jerry and the assistant district attorney and myself, may I say, we performed a miracle in getting this case before a jury, and finally, with the third trial, getting a conviction. That conviction changed my life, and I believe the life of my children, because when the guilty verdict was read, I truly felt that the anger, the bitterness, the hatred that I had harbored, knowingly and sometimes unknowingly, just escaped from every pore of my body. It was nothing as freeing as that, because you mentioned about the district attorney. He ran for governor, and at the same time, Beckwith ran for lieutenant governor. So what a combo that would have made.
And you know what Beckwith's slogan was when he ran, don't you?
I forgot.
Vote for Beckwith, he's a straight shooter. I'm not making that up.
And he got 25,000 votes.
He did.
Is it 25,000?
Pretty scary.
Yeah, it is.
Well, anyway, I'll sign off. Jerry, you
No,
finish
go
your
ahead.
no. But I want to ask the audience something, if I may.
Sure.
Do you believe what you are hearing from us?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, all right. It's not a fairy tale. It's a true one. This man, second to my left, found the murder weapon. Jerry, you say where, but he also helped me to calm my nerves when young people were interviewed on television. And there were too many of them who said, I don't know why she, meaning me, is pushing for justice for another trial. The man is old. He's going to die soon. Let God take care of him. I was so angry with that. And I remember saying, but God has helpers. And I happen to be one of them. We will see that justice prevails. And when we were called to come to the jury decision that would be announced in court, and this was the last trial, my daughter and my eldest son were there at the hotel with me. And they said, hurry. The judge is going to have the jury give their decision in 5 minutes. Now, can you imagine 2 females trying to get hot rollers out of their hair and get dressed and whatnot, trying to get there in time? But I remember breathing this prayer. God, I've done all I can. Your will be done. And we rushed out of there, rushed up the stairs, and you could just hear people coming because no one really expected that verdict that day. And in the courtroom, I had flashbacks of the first trial and the second trial, and how none of it seemed to be coming together. And the promise that I had made to Medger to see that justice prevailed just didn't seem as though it was going to happen. And we got in there, and the judge read the verdict, guilty. And I felt every bit of anger, disappointment, and hatred escape from my body at that time. Jerry Mitchell was key in helping to solve that race, of helping to send someone who had committed the ultimate crime to justice. So we became friends. I'm saying all of that to say it takes more than one person to build freedom. And we became a team. And Jerry, I take this opportunity to say that I thank you. I have never seen anyone go after a party as you have. And as a result of it, would you please tell this audience, excuse me, sir, please tell this audience how many civil rights cases have been solved since
You make convictions?
convictions, yeah,
24.
24.
This was the first, and then there have been 24 now.
Jerry's modest, but
is
his
modest.
same work led to the conviction of the Imperial Wizard of the White Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, Sam Bowers, who was finally...
Now, that was an entertaining trial.
That was a great trial, too. And he was convicted in connection with the firebombing and the murder of Vernon Damer in Hattiesburg, who was NAACP leader. And then more recently, preacher killing in Neshoba County for his role in the famous Neshoba County murders, Freedom Summer of '64. So Jerry has been very dogged in his pursuit of these people. Leslie, you touched on something I wanted to go back to when you were talking about the role that Medgar Evers played in developing these grassroots organizations around the state. And it was always my impression, and there were other organizations involved in the movement, obviously, and you mentioned SNCC and CORE and SCLC, but Mississippi was an NAACP state above everything, was it not?
Yeah. Well, it was. It provided the tremendous foundation. The Regional Council of Negro Leadership that was formed in Mount Bayou in 1951 that Medgar was associated with, and Aaron Henry was associated with, and Amzie Moore was associated with, and others.
Didn't they used to have like, what, 10,000 people at some of those meetings?
It has been reported in Mount Bayou that on occasion they would have gatherings of 10,000
I mean,
people.
national speak. I mean, it's not just.
Oh yes, in the town of Mount Bayou, which probably had less than 1,000, but but people would gather there. But Curtis, the important thing to me is that, you know, there had been Stringer and Darton and all those people before Medgar, right? But when he became the full-time field director of the NAACP in 1954. He branched out into areas where people hadn't gone before. You know, Medgar Evers just was one of the coolest persons. I'm sure internally he was on fire, but he was just absolutely so cool. He exuded leadership. I remember being in a meeting in Macomb, part of '62, and there was some commotion about what could happen. It was a Sunday afternoon meeting, and Medgar and Aaron spoke, and Aaron Medgar had this way of reassuring people. I mean, he had this way of making you feel that everything was going to be all right. You know, now, I'm sure there were circumstances when he probably felt, well, you know, it's sort of dicey here, but he had this ability to convey that. That's why, you know, I often say, what if he had lived? You know, what if he had lived in a different time? You know, I mean, he could have been the governor of Mississippi. You know, he could have been a U.S. senator from Mississippi. I mean, that was Medgar Evers. I mean, so he had all of these things going for him in his way of communicating with people. I mean, so as a young person, I was tremendously impressed with Medgar Evers. And the older I get, the more I really appreciate what he did as the leader of the NAACP in Mississippi. You know, we have named a lot of things in Jackson in his honor. I was president of the city council when we named the airport initially for Medgar, and the post office. But, you know, we really should, and this is not superficial, but every town in Mississippi, Curtis, there should be a Medgar Evers Street or a Medgar Evers building or a Medgar Evers school. Because, you know, if you think about it, Medgar Evers really was an educator. He really taught a lot of people in this state. I mean, he was concerned about the welfare and education, and he worked, just think, the Jackson movement from 61 to 63, that was really about the involvement of the young people in the NAACP, this North Jackson chapter of the NAACP, the Tougaloo chapter of the NAACP. You know, he worked so well with the young people. I mean, he related in a remarkable way with young people. So he inspired not only me, but so many other folk. And as we sat here this afternoon, this evening, and we look at the contradictions that we're dealing with in Mississippi. I mean, I think Mrs. Evers is exactly right. I mean, he would be pleased, he would be proud, because we've made remarkable progress in 50 years. But on the other hand, we have a long ways to go, you know, in Mississippi right now. I mean, just think, this morning, the Mississippi legislature, a joint resolution, concurrent resolution, in honor and the memory of the work of Medgar Evers by the Senate and the House. But we in the state just elected one of the most conservative governors in the country.
I'd say that may have been the most constructive thing the legislature did this session.
Well, I think it was by far the most constructive thing they did. You know, we have 300,000 people who don't have any kind of health insurance in this state, and we have a governor saying, you know, we don't need to expand Medicaid. I mean, I'm thinking that Medgar Evers would really be upset over these kinds of things that's happening in Mississippi. We are a state where 37% of the population is African American, and there is not one African American statewide elected official. And then now, I know other things are happening in other places, and that people can readily point out that the president is African American, but I'm talking about Mississippi, the state that Medgar Evers loved. And so we have a lot of work to do because we are still dealing with these contradictions. Just think about how hard Medgar worked to ensure the right to vote in this country and in Mississippi. And then we have a state legislature now that is engaging in a way to deny African Americans a right that we thought we had fought for and died for and bled for, and now as a nationwide conspiracy, voter ID, you know, things that we thought we had fought. You know, I went through the poll tax. I went through all of that. Yeah, thank you. But, you know, I went through all that. So I'm sure that Medgar would be on the case. I mean, he would be out right now organizing. I've read some where some people say, you know, Medgar Evers was not a good organizer. That's a lie. Medgar Evers was a supreme organizer. He would be out right now, raising hell, quite frankly, because we know that the things that he fought for and so many other people fought for, we got to fight those battles all over again. And I think the spirit and the memory of Medgar Evers should compel us that are still living and breathing and who are concerned about freedom should be out there fighting every day, because, I mean, I think that's what he would want us to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
To go back 50 years, rather than Beckwith kind of snuffing out a movement by murdering Medgar Evers, it seems to me that it really galvanized the movement in Mississippi. Is that not
Absolutely.
right?
I mean, his assassination clearly inspired not only Mississippi, but inspired the nation. And again, the involvement of the young people from the NAACP, the young people from SNCC and CORE, and all of these different organizations, the way that the movement took off. I mean, just think, Medgar was there at the birth of COFO. And just think now, COFO coordinated all of the different civil rights organizations in Mississippi. And COFO really could not have worked without the leadership of Medgar and Aaron, because you had these people coming from the outside, you know, who were not Mississippians. And Medgar was diplomatic enough to work with, he worked with Bob Moses, he worked with Dave Dennis, he worked with all those people. You know, that was the kind of leadership that he provided in Mississippi. You know, we would be a far different state, I submit, that if Medgar Evers had lived. Just think how we have robbed ourselves of the talent of women, black and white, and of men and women like Medgar Evers, who would have been in leadership positions in this state. You know, so yes, his assassination helped to flower the movement in Mississippi and across the country. And we, I think, as we think about where we are today, it is important, in my judgment, for us to build upon that memory and that legacy of Medgar, because we still have work to do. We still have too many negatives going on across the country, because he wouldn't be pleased at what is happening with the violence in our communities, not only in Jackson and Port Gibson and wherever, but across the country. And so I think in that spirit that we have to do what we can to make this a better place.
Ms. Evers, go right ahead. You.
No, if I just may add this to your sterling remarks, and I'm so appreciative to hear you say what you are saying. There was a moment at Medgar's funeral in Jackson, and there were two, the one here and the one in Arlington Cemetery. But I have photographs of a crowd of people coming from, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of.
The funeral home?
Masonic Temple?
Masonic Temple, thank you.
Yeah.
Masonic Temple, where the funeral was held. And there's an outpouring of people who were there chanting, "After Medgar, no more fear. After Medgar, no more fear." They ran and they rushed from Lynn Street on down to Capitol, with many of them holding hats, holding up their hands, and all of them saying, "After Medgar, no more fear." And that was a turning point, I think, in terms of people's involvement and willingness to take risk of their own lives and say, this is a different day because of this man. And that's one of my prized photographs. It was a turning point in Mississippi and perhaps in the nation as well.
In the months and years that followed, the movement really began to take more, as the term they used, direct action, physically being involved, throwing themselves into danger. There was, it was no longer a passive movement, but it was one that was tough and strong. And my sense is, it as you say, the genesis for it may have been Medgar Evers' murder and the righteous wrath that it created, that we're not going to be pushed around anymore, and we're not going to let one bullet stop us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think clearly that gave new impetus to the movement. But if we could just go back a couple of years and remember that in 1961 in Jackson, Medgar organized what has now become known as the Tougaloo Nine, right? This was 1961, March of 61, where they attempted to integrate the public library in Jackson, that demonstration. And with those young people getting out of jail in Jackson. In between 61 and 63, what was known now as the Jackson movement, and those demonstrations and the boycotts that Medgar Evers was really the leader of. I mean, obviously there were other people involved, but Medgar's brilliance, leadership, his strategy, pull that off. So, I mean, and that was, in a very real sense, the mass movement in Jackson. You know, Macomb was 61, Bob Moses working with the people in Macomb, the NAACP people, but that Jackson movement. And then Medgar was, as we all know now, Medgar was doing that in defiance of Roy Wilkins and the NAACP people in New York who were saying, cool it, don't do it. I mean, you know the story. But I mean, because he was on the payroll of the NAACP. But, you know, it goes back to what Mrs. Evers said. I mean, that man loved Mississippi. So Roy Wilkins was saying, cool it, don't do it. The Kennedy brothers were saying, you know, cool off, you know, just do the boycott, don't be doing the demonstrations. But, I mean, he defied the persons that he reported to because of what he was doing. And then he had the support of the young people and the leadership in Jackson, you know. So I mean, Mrs. Evers knows more about this story than I do, but I just know that I'm sure she had conversations with him at night when he probably shared with her what Roy Wilkins had said that particular day. But he still moved ahead in spite of what Roy was trying to get him to do.
Well, I thought it was a good secret, kept secret about all of that, but I can't help but smile when you talk about that. Because at that time, the NAACP national office said, the only way we are going to approach this is through the legal system.
Right.
Yeah.
The young people, particularly in Jackson, were saying, no, we have to protest. And that caused a split in the public there because the young people were saying protest. The middle-aged, I can say that, was saying, no way, you're gonna shake up everything and stop all the progress we are making. And the senior citizens said, it's no way. We're gonna march. We're gonna demonstrate. Those of you in the middle, stay wherever you are, we don't need you. and it became the, if I might call it the old and the young movement. And Medgar was being told to make a decision, to either go the legislative route, which the NAACP wanted, or to go with the people. He made his decision. It was to go with the people. And he indicated to me, I don't know how much longer we will be in Mississippi. We might move to California, and I think that's why I moved to California after his death. But it was a trying time. It was a time when the civil rights organizations were each one trying to get an upper hand on the other. Yeah. I can recall some very heated conversations with leadership as to whether the NAACP national would allow NAACP local to work with Dr. King. Big, major discussions about that. I had encouraged Medgar to move to California. I said, we can do the same thing in California. And his answer was absolutely no. This is home, this is my state, and we're going to fight this. So who knows, if he had lived a little longer, he might have had his own organization here in Mississippi.
Absolutely.
Might well have done that, because he was being restricted by the national office, and he could not turn his back on the people, the young and whatnot. And the stories that would come out of the young people being held in the fairgrounds in Jackson became known as the prison pit, where the police officers would deliver food and water to those who were confined. No shade, no nothing, open to the elements. And they would bring those tin tubs of food and water onto the fairground and say, "This is for you." Spit in them and walk away. And there was no way that Medgar was going to be able to leave that. I truly wanted him to be safe. But I recall a conversation that we had. And I said, for the sake of your family, let's move. And he looked at me and he said, "Myrlie, you have a decision to make. Either you're with me or you aren't. That's your decision." And I recall saying to him, "I'll let you know when I make my decision." And he replied to me, "Don't wait too long." This decision was made quickly. It was not easy being a part of the civil rights movement. And all of the romanticism about couples who go out and fight the bad guys and whatnot, we had our own struggles of keeping our relationships and our marriages together. I knew he was not about to budge. I knew I loved him too much to leave. So the children, Daddy, and Myrlie, Medgar, we're here. And we are here to stay. And the subject never came up again. It wasn't necessary. But that was his dedication. Because I truly believe that if I had said, "I can't take it anymore, goodbye," he would have said, "Best wishes." And that would have been it. And he would have stayed and fought the battle as best he could with all the support that he had to do the job. And I'm injecting this to put a little humor in it, and I hope it doesn't fall flat. But I could not see another woman with my husband. He belonged to me. So I played second fiddle to the movement. But that was all right, because I believed in him too.
Let me wind up, we're about out of time, by posing a question, and a what-if question that, like Leslie had talked about, and you just piqued my interest when you talked about the possibility of him moving beyond the NAACP. It did have a reputation as being more moderate for all of the courage of the NAACP leaders in Mississippi. It was viewed nationally as a moderate, slow-moving, really part of the establishment almost. What in those turbulent years in Mississippi that followed 1963 up, well, you can go all the way to the present, but let's say the period from 63 until 1970. Do you think Medgar Evers would have broken with the NAACP and formed his own organization? Would he have allied himself with one of the other existing organizations?
I believe that, if the NAACP had demanded that he only work in Mississippi through the legislative forces in Washington, D.C., that Medgar would have left. or he would have stayed here and formed his own organization. He was not about to be told that he could not work with X, Y, and Z, that he could not talk to Dr. King. He was not to be dictated to about those things because of his beliefs and because this state of Mississippi was his. And there is a picture in, I believe, some brochures that we have of Medgar and a few others boycotting or marching downtown Jackson. And if you look very closely, one of those persons next to him was Roy Wilkins, who was head of the NAACP. Medgar had challenged him to expand his knowledge on the people, the dedication, whatnot, in the state of Mississippi in particular. And if you are going to dictate, you need to see what's happening here. Come down and see. And I remember how uncomfortable Roy was, because I wasn't in the demonstration, but in the discussions. I think that helped to change how they felt, I think. And I'm going to share something now that perhaps I should not. But having said that, I'm going to move ahead and say this. A couple of days, nights before Medgar was assassinated, we were having mass meetings almost every night.
Yeah.
There was a meeting of some of the New York, then, executives of the NAACP. And there were a few friends of Medgar's who took time to be with him as he went about his business, particularly at night, to be sure that he was safe. And at that meeting, they requested of the NAACP staff people who were there for additional funds to help pay some people to be with Medgar and perhaps save his life. The answer was, no, we will not do it. We have more important things to do with our money. And I recall vividly that night when Medgar came home, tired, almost broken, and he told me what happened. And tears streamed down his face. And he said, "That's okay. I'm here to stay." That's the personification of this man. And to be, my word now, betrayed by those he thought he could trust or hope would work with him was extremely painful for him. So in the last few days of his life, he had made up his mind it was no way that he was going to leave the state. It was no way he would betray the people, black and white, who believed in him and in the movement. And if it meant that he had to die, he would do it. And I told him, I can't make it without you. And he said to me that night, you are stronger than you think you are. You'll be okay. Take care of my children. And what I have attempted to do over these 50 years was to keep his memory alive, to fight for justice in the court system, and to see that he is remembered as he was, a hero. And I thank you so much for sharing the light on that.
Yeah.
There is, or has been, I'll put it in the past tense, anger. But it's something wonderful about anger. It can motivate you to do good. And in spite of all of it, I think this is the way Medgar would have wanted it, not necessarily for glory, but because he believed. And because I and others believe in him, we continue to keep his name alive. And the movement that he worked so hard to build, to keep it going as well. And I can't thank you enough for having this session.
We are
It's therapeutic and it's good.
Great.
Thank you.
We're thankful for what he did.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was just simply going to say we're thankful for what he did. We're thankful we have people like Leslie McLemore and Jerry Mitchell in Mississippi, and we're especially happy to have you back in Mississippi too. So
Thank you.
thank you so much.
His
Thank you
daughter-
all for being here.
His daughter is here someplace.
Is
His daughter. Medgar's daughter.
Brina
Yep.
Evers. So thank you so much. Let's adjourn to the lobby and join us for the reception. Thank you.